what do we want to deepen? So let me start with what we do not want to deepen. We do not want to deepen partisanship. And frankly, if I want to summarize the major problem facing democracy all over the world, it's a problem of deepening partisanship. We somehow have lost the cross-party discussions. We've lost the cross-party friendships that used to be part of, older style democracy. We've got whips that control the thinking in their parties and control discipline, and frankly, partisanship, it's now become perhaps the United States' #1 problem, because it means you just cannot have the other side will block your reform. Partisanship is a recipe for gridlock, and so that's something we do not want to deepen. We do not want to deepen money politics, which is another of these ills that have come across modern democracy. And money politics, something you guys know very well in India, something that is so prevalent in the US. What does it mean in the US? Well, it means billionaires can certainly run for office. They can run for office. But if you're an ordinary person, and if you don't have the backing of a billionaire, that's another way of doing it, to be the mouthpiece for some Las Vegas casino owner, if you're not that, if you're running on your own, a senator today has to raise something like $10,000 every week that he's in office so he can then run for the next election. Now, that is a very tough thing to do. In the West, and this is something that is not as appropriate to the Global South because the budget's not there, but in the North, the answer to money politics, they thought, was public funding of election campaigns. And many countries, Germany, I think is leading in this regard, many countries adopted rules for public funding of election campaigns to get away from this problem of especially corporate domination of the process. And the US adopted that rule. And though I'm not a critic of Barack Obama, and I think he's done fine, and he'll probably get a second term, he actually has killed public funding of elections in the US because he was able to raise more money through direct funding by individuals. But the way Obama did it, by having a vast number of individuals giving small amounts of money, is highly acceptable. The way we've moved in the US is that now we have these political action committees, in theory not tied to the candidates, backed by billionaires and so forth. So money politics is an enormous problem in India, a problem in the US, a problem in so many countries in the world. That's something we don't want to deepen. And the other thing that we don't want to deepen is the sort of the shallowness of the debates that we see in so many places. We're not seeing the level of deliberative democracy that we think is what is healthy for a democracy. What do we want to deepen? And so let me sort of conclude with the issue of that hopefully brings all these things, all these various things together. I think what we want to deepen is public involvement. That the, not panacea, but the indispensable requirement for a healthy democracy is public involvement, one way or another. And let me go back to a wonderful book written in the 1830s by a gentleman called Alexis de Tocqueville, called Democracy in America. So he was a French nobleman who traveled around America in the 1830s, and he saw a society very different from the old world of Europe that he knew, the aristocratic world, the hierarchical world of Europe that he knew, and he found a new society. And in many ways, America in the 1830s is the global South. It's a new country devising new rules. But I went back to de Tocqueville. wanted to see what he had to say about civil society. And although he doesn't use this exact terminology, he doesn't use these terms, what I drew from Tocqueville was, he said, civil society achieves 6 things in America. It's a bulwark against tyranny. It allows people to organize on the basis of common goals, not ascription. And this is so important. And in fact, it's still one of the problems that India has and so many countries. People vote not because of what they believe, but because of who they are. They vote because they were born. They had qualities ascribed to them at birth. Religion, language, locality, all these caste, in India, very important issue. So they're voting because of who they are, not because of what they believe. Civil society allows you to emerge from who you are into groups based on belief. So this was a fundamentally important issue that he saw. Thirdly, it gives individuals an effective voice by speaking in a larger context. Fourthly, it allows for the contestation of ideas. It allows for the marketplace of ideas to occur. That's not Tocqueville's term. That came 100 years later by American judge Oliver Wendell Holmes. He coined that term, the marketplace of ideas. It allows individuals to have an effective voice and to aggregate their views. So, you know, it really, in a democracy, one person's views won't affect things too much, but if one person can influence 1 million people, you aggregate these views, and then you have influence. Civil society is the basis for that. And finally, again, not to Tocqueville's term, it's a term frankly made very used a lot by the World Bank, and that is, it builds social capital. It builds social capital. So these are the things that civil society creates, and let's just go back to those issues about democracy. Civil society will help you to gain a common imagination. You can build society and the nation through civil society. So I think it's important for that first element. Obviously, it's important for the concept of the will of the people, both through elections and through the deliberative processes. Initially, it doesn't seem to be as important for the concept of rule of law. But here's one of the paradoxes of rule of law. Rule of law only works if a huge majority of the people voluntarily abide by the law. Because the law can only handle a very small percentage of lawbreakers in the general population. If the whole population becomes lawbreakers, the rule of law will break down. No institution, no police force will be able to deal with that institution. So actually the paradox is that rule of law works best where it's least needed, where people voluntarily abide by the rule of law. And so again, civil society is a vehicle for this. Horizontal accountability. We need to force institutions to do their job. And so we can't just separate institutions as playing their own game somewhere above, high up. We need to monitor those institutions and force them to play their jobs. If the Corruption Commission's not working, or the Ombudsman's office is not working, it's civil society that has to get involved in that process. And it goes without without saying that for vertical accountability, civil society is the main actor to hold parliaments and institutions to their work. We need to be evidence-based. That's one of the great aspects of modern social science. Simply asserting things is insufficient. We need to be evidence-based. And I came across a marvelous piece of evidence recently by a Romanian academic by the name of Alina Mingu Pipidi, P-I-P-P-I-D-I. And she works at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. And she did a study for the Norwegian aid agency, NORA. So if if you Google BPD and Verdi and so forth, you'll get this study. It's basically a study of, and she comes from the quantifying school of governance. You know, she's a numbers person. And so she's trying to measure the impact of all sorts of different things on corruption. So she looked at, you know, laws, she looked at the UN Convention Against Corruption, she looked at, you know, who were parties to various other conventions and so forth. She looked at whether or not an anti-corruption commission had been formed, whether the Ombudsman's offered a whole range of variables, asking and looking which variable had an impact. She found only 2 variables had an impact. And this was a 40-country study, so it's got some validity to it. 2 variables had an impact. One, without just obviously what I was saying before, the strength of civil society. The stronger the civil society in the country, the less corruption you're going to have. So there was a clear relationship between civil society. And the second thing she found, and this again I think validates the Indian experience, the right to information was the only law that had a direct relationship with lowering corruption. And so, and of course, if you think about it, it stands to reason that transparency, which is what the right to information achieves, transparency is the way to stop corruption. So none of the other processes had any quantifiable impact on corruption except civil society and the right to information. And let me just conclude by talking about this right to information. It's people might think that actually it flows from northern ideas called freedom of information. And we had freedom of information legislation in various countries in the global north for many years, and we had it in Australia. When I was a bureaucrat, one of my jobs, I used to be legal advisor in the Department of Foreign Affairs in Australia. One of my jobs was to oversee the freedom of information legislation and how it impacted on us. And I can tell you, it is definitely not the right to information. It is a grudging, mean perspective by government to give as little information as we can, to try to obfuscate, delay, increase the cost of the process to make it until the petitioner finally gives up and goes away. So the freedom of information is not the right to information. But I think it was India and the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative in particular who really championed this idea of turning it into a right. And when you turn it into a right, it finally has teeth. And I know the Indian experiment is in the early days, but I think that experiment will be the key tool in the hands of civil society to deepen democracy.